Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of The Return of Sherlock Holmes, Season 1, Episode 3, The Second Stain. Watson's voiceover has returned for this episode as he explains Holmes will be receiving two distinguished visitors. We're straight into Baker Street as Watson and Mrs. Hudson fuss to make the room presentable. The men arrive and immediately tell Holmes what is going on.
A document has been stolen from my private dispatch box. And when I discovered my loss, which was at 8 o'clock this morning, I at once informed the Prime Minister. It was at his suggestion that we both come to you.
They can't go to the police due to the sensitive political nature of the document, possibly leading to war if the contents are made public. What's noticeable about this introduction is how Watson is dressed in his finest clothes and how Holmes has adopted an unusual seating position, crossing his legs on his chair. Holmes asks the exact details of the disappearance of the document. It remained in the presence of the Right Honourable Trelawney Hope at all times. Only his wife and himself knew it was in their house, and only a few people knew of its existence before it was stolen.
Both my wife and I are light sleepers and are prepared to swear that no one could have entered the room during the night, and yet this morning the paper is gone.
Holmes wants to know the contents of the letter, but the PM is only willing to describe the envelope the document is in. As we've seen before, this lack of candidness displeases Holmes and causes him to reject taking on the case, which causes the PM to relent. Now, if you've been paying attention and working on your own deductive reasoning, you should be able to work out who has stolen the document already. As Holmes says, eliminate the impossible and whatever remains, regardless of how improbable, is the solution. The answer here isn't even that improbable. If only he and his wife could have taken the document, then only he or his wife did take the document. But that is not the central mystery here. Who took it is less important than why and where its destination is intended to be. At this point, Holmes isn't concerned with any of this, as he fears there is no reason the document hasn't reached its intended destination, and will therefore not be found. Is this the shortest case Holmes has ever taken on? Not quite. He hasn't given up yet. He's narrowed it down to 2 or 3 possible suspects.
But only 3 men capable of playing so bold a game: Oberstein, La Rothiere, and Eduardo Lucas. Even now, if we could be sure which one of them has taken it.
Then something curious happens. He gets a visit from Trelawney Hope's wife, Hilda. She is there to ask Holmes how important the missing document is, as her husband won't tell her. However, Holmes has already impressed upon us how important this document truly is. He's not one to overstate something, so we know his concern about the theft is genuine, and he refuses to tell her, but is willing to say it may cost her husband his career. I think this settles which of the two actually took the document. She attempts to throw him off the scent by claiming she is merely concerned for her husband.
And you on your side will not, I'm sure, think the worst of me, because I desire to share my husband's anxieties, even against his will.
After she's gone, we see the two very different characters of Watson and Holmes, as Watson comments on how attractive she is, while Holmes has analysed her character and is not taken in by her concern being her only motive. Yet his inability to read women fully leaves him lacking with the vital data that he requires. This demonstration of how the two complement each other just goes to show their character development has not quite ended just yet. As Holmes sets about to leave, he is stopped in his tracks. One of Holmes's suspects, Eduardo Lucas, has been murdered. Surely no coincidence. What's fascinating about this episode so far is that we've barely left Baker Street, barring some establishing shots, and yet the characters occupying a single room have been captivating and driven the story forward regardless. It takes real skill to hold the attention of an audience in a single location, and this is really a masterclass, as Brett is able to generate the feeling of action in the way he stalks around 221B, supported by an excellent supporting cast. We finally do leave as Holmes makes his way to the murder scene, and it's reminiscent of Brett's earlier role in My Fair Lady, although it might have been a step too far to have him burst into song. He arrives at the murder scene just as Scotland Yard is escorting their suspect away. He lingers hidden from view, as his involvement in the Trelawney Hope case must remain a secret. We then see a side of Holmes we haven't seen before, pensive and worried about how the case is unfolding, as he tries to make a sense of it. He seems in this moment genuinely lost. Normally, when he wants to ruminate on the facts of a case, he becomes very still and deliberate, but here he's a bundle of energy. It's a very clever way of maintaining the high stakes of the case, which might seem quite mundane on the face of it. The disappearance of a single piece of paper, regardless of how important it is hard to keep entertaining in a visual medium, but this is a real lesson in making the mundane riveting. Watson comes in with news that the murderer has been caught, Lucas's wife, but Holmes is not interested in this news while he still struggles to work out where the document is and how Lucas was connected to it. So distracted is he accidentally sets a newspaper on fire, which is a great tension breaker to end the scene.
Should I bring this to a successful conclusion, it will certainly represent the crowning glory of my career.
Holmes! Go!
They both return to the murder scene and try and fail to avoid Lestrade. Holmes feigns awareness of the case, but Lestrade calls him back to help with an unusual detail that makes no difference to the case, but clearly has put a bee in Lestrade's bonnet. He plays right into Holmes' hands here by giving him a tour of the crime scene, where a bloodstain on the rug has soaked through, but not stained the wood. At least not where the rug is, but rather on the opposite corner of the stain. Someone moved the carpet, but Lestrade has no idea who or why. Holmes manages to get rid of Lestrade by asking him to grill the policeman tasked with watching the scene, as he sets about frantically examining the floor and finds what he's looking for, a secret compartment. Lestrade comes back with the sergeant just as they straighten the room out, and he reveals that he allowed a woman to take a peek at the crime scene, but she fainted, and by the time he'd returned with medicinal brandy, for the third time in 3 episodes if you're keeping brandy score, the woman had gone. As they leave, Holmes shows a picture to the sergeant, who confirms his theory, and he is delighted.
Good Lord, Mr. Holmes.
Hey!
He and Watson then go straight to Lady Hilda Trelawney Hope, much to her chagrin, but he insists she hand over the document to him. She pretends not to know anything about it, but he lays out the case to her in full. She continues to deny it, and he deploys his final gambit of waiting for her husband's return. Eventually, she buckles before her husband comes back and gives him the document. He promises to save her from trouble on the condition she tells him what her part to play in this has been. She explains that Lucas contacted her about a love letter she had written before she was married that would embarrass her and her husband, and blackmails her into delivering the document. In some ways this feels quite quaint, but this was the Victorian equivalent of leaked nudes being made public, which in that context makes it much more serious and much more understandable as to why she would do anything to get the letter back. This is also a sort of dry run for a later story, but I'll not spoil that just yet. She witnessed the murder of Lucas and realised she was in more trouble than ever, despite still having the document. Her husband arrives home with the PM, and she excuses herself, as Holmes puts his plan into action. He suggests the document is still in the dispatch box, something which Trelawney Hope finds ridiculous, but the PM convinces him to look anyway. As he goes through each document, Holmes uses his famous sleight of hand to return the letter, to their astonishment. He is able to play this off by saying that it had to be there because it wasn't anywhere else. I would describe this episode as a bit of a journeyman story. Nothing too flashy or spectacular, but it is entertaining, has a nice little mystery element at the centre of it, and a satisfying conclusion. It's similar to the Naval Treaty in some ways, the same basic concept, but with a far more sympathetic thief and different plot points along the way. It lacks a little panache, as Holmes never interacts with a villain per se, and doesn't really have much to do with the story other than getting the document back in the dispatch box. I think that's really where the story is at its weakest. Holmes doesn't really do anything, and doesn't really need to be there, as surely Lady Hilda would have worked out a way to return the document eventually. As a result of Holmes having little to do, Watson has even less to do. It certainly feels as if Doyle had the idea of the moved rug and worked back from there. It's not a bad story, just a slightly lacklustre one. There's very little in the episode to praise or critique. Had Holmes been involved in solving the murder, that might have given it a little spark of something, but it would have been too much to engineer from the original story, and so I'm quite glad they didn't try and change it. I'm surprised they chose to adapt this one over some of the ones they never got around to adapting, but I imagine the budget would have been fairly low on this too, so maybe that was a consideration. Even though the story isn't perhaps as exciting as other episodes, the mystery is solid, the performances as usual are brilliant, and I think overall it works for me, even if it is not very flashy. For me, this is a 4 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.